That's Eric, and I really appreciate being here with all of you, and I'm very honored to speak to you, and particularly following the wonderful talks I heard this morning from Roshi Joan and Roshi Emeritus Norman. And I heartily agree about everything. Compassion, and everybody has to be a bodhisattva. Don't give us any nonsense about, I can't be a bodhisattva. You can be a bodhisattva, you can be a bodhisattva Jew, a bodhisattva Christian. How do we make a Chrisbo? A Jew bow, not a Jew boo, but a Jew bow. We don't have many Isbos, Islamic bodhisattvas, but there are many, but we don't have a name for it. And Hinbos we have definitely. Baba Ram Das is a big Hinbo. He was very freaked out about the fact that all his friends are Buddhists. And he complained to me, and he said, Bob, in fact, he invited me to deal with this. He says, Bob, I'm a Hindu, and all my friends are Buddhists. What can I do? And I said, you can, and then I channeled Yogi Berra for him. And I said, Ram Dass, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So anyway, I wanted to, fitting with what they were saying about everybody being bodhisattva and what Roshi Joan was saying about compassion. The thing about compassion that is a kind of esoteric thing normally, but actually is not that esoteric. It's in sutras, Mahayana sutras too. You have to realize that when Buddha was teaching mainly for the first 400 years after his life, after his coarse body life, for 400 years he said that Theravada or dualistic Buddhism would be the most important one. And he didn't want the Mahayana vision of non-dual samsara nirvana, non-dual fusion. He didn't want to teach that widely because it would be too confusing for people. And they needed to think that there was a way to escape from suffering. And in order to think that, they had to think that the place apart from suffering was somewhere else, since they couldn't imagine that this world, right in the middle of it, even during a Republican administration, could be free of suffering. They couldn't imagine that. And so then they would be either disillusioned or they would be self-indulged and cynical in one way or the other. And so he didn't teach that until the dualistic form of Buddhism had established institutions and monastic institutions and the adulation and the respect and the worship of the population, where they would feed all these free lunch eating monks and nuns and so on, mendicants, all of them. And he wanted that needed a few hundred years to take hold. And he was the Buddha genius is such that he can easily see the way societies will develop and the world will develop. And so that's how he did it. So then the way Mahayana was, in other words, esoteric initially. And now we seem to be in this time of where everybody has to be a bodhisattva, according to Emeritus Abbot Norman Fisher, Zen Abbot Norman Fisher. Then we need the esoteric as well as the exoteric. We definitely need it. I was recently in Sri Lanka. First thing I want to announce. I was recently in Sri Lanka, and I had the thrill of reading every day and studying intently the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, just so people won't feel in a way anti-Theravada. And that's one of their great sutras. They have shorter versions of it, but the Maha one is the longer version. And in that version, at the end, there's a consideration of the Four Noble Truths as part of your mindfulness meditation, where you're meditating on the mental objects, the dharmas in the sense of objects in your mind. And the most important mental objects for Buddha's point of view is the Four Noble Truths and the Theravada level of teaching. And in that, I was so excited and thrilled, and my admiration again for Shakyamuni grew even more in his generosity as a teacher and in the truth of his saying that he did to the bhikkhus in Theravada, I have held nothing back. I didn't hide anything from you. I told you everything. But of course, he didn't emphasize some of the things that later became more or less esoteric. But he told them that. And that is this. In considering the Four Noble Truths, the first is the truth of suffering, as all of you know here. I'm sure everyone here knows the Four Noble Truths. And in the truth of suffering, when you consider it in meditation, in your mindfulness meditation, in which you go beyond counting breath, which is part of being aware of the body, and you go to the mental objects after dealing with sensations and with mind. And then you look at mental objects, and the Four Noble Truths are most important. So then you look at all the different sensations of all of your senses, visual, audio, smell, taste, touch, and mental sensations, even of encountering objects in your mind. And you realize they're all suffering because they're all accompanied by craving, and they all don't last. And then you enjoy them, and that's why they become addictive, but they go away and you want more. So they are suffering. And that kind of pleasure that you have is called the suffering of change. So then he goes in great detail, lists all possible experiential sensations you can have. They're all suffering. And there are other kinds of suffering, but that's the most important. Then he talks about the cause, which is the craving, and doesn't emphasize self-centered ignorance as much in that teaching as he does in other places. But anyway, he makes craving a big thing. Then he talks about the main noble truth, which he says is the real one, and that's the truth of Nirvana. And, I feel I'm retiring as an academic teacher, and I'm, as the Tibetans will say, when you ask someone my age, you're allowed after 70, when someone asks, how are you? You can say Mashizamla in Tibetan. You're allowed to say that, which means just barely not dead. If you try to say it when you're younger, forget about it. They don't like it. And that means under 70. You're still middle-aged at 69. And they think. And so in my last years of whatever, I want to correct this impression that the world has, that Buddha was a big Mr. Killjoy, that everything is suffering, that you're going to just have a miserable time, and that the big thing in life is to surrender to that. And that is the first noble truth for some types of disciples. But that is not the realistic one. Buddha says that the first, suffering, the second, its cause, and the fourth, the path to freedom from it, are all relative reality. They're all illusory, dreamlike. They are somewhat real, and they are difficult for us, but they're not the final reality. The only final reality, which means actual reality, is nirvana. That is why he's grinning. If you think Buddha is grinning there, he looks a little serious here, but he's usually grinning. And the morning he was enlightened, he was grinning. And why would he grin if he was looking out on a planet full of suffering? He's grinning because he sees bliss in the world. That's what nirvana means. Nibbana, the Pali say, or nirvana, as they say in Sanskrit. It means a bliss. But freedom from suffering is just a sort of simple way of putting it. But when your pain leaves, it's bliss, isn't it? Isn't it? Don't you feel bliss when you're released from pain? Of course you do. And that's the actual reality, and that's what he discovered. And also, he also was a bodhisattva, so he had a vow. And he's not going to have his own personal bliss apart from other beings, because bodhisattva vow is to bring all beings into that bliss with him. And so therefore, when he looks out at the vast ocean of beings, he sees all bliss. Now you say, how is that possible? Somebody had a broken leg, somebody had leprosy, somebody was adult, somebody was dying, somebody was suffering. How can they be seen as bliss? Well, if the ultimate reality of all life is bliss, then even those persons are made of that energy. So insofar as they even exist, insofar as the cells of the body that is dying are still holding together to some extent, insofar as their awareness is somehow theirs in some way, and even the feeling of letting go of everything which happens at death. I don't know if you guys noticed, I'm sure a lot of you did in this audience, the near-death experience books. Those people who are out of body and they're heading down the tunnel through the clear light in the near-death accounts that you have, when Jesus or the ally or the shaman or whoever their guide is shows up and says, not your time, you're going back, right? And then wham, they go back into the broken body or whatever it was that released them from it. They're not happy. They don't want to go back, right? They say, no way, I'm in the tunnel, in the light. Wow, I feel great. Like the end of all those movies, the Jacob's Ladder and whatever, boom, they go off into clear light. So they don't suffer. And so Buddha sees everybody like that. That's how Buddha sees you. Why does a Buddha People say, I met an enlightened being, and I felt accepted just as I was, Yeah, but they didn't see you like you was the way you think you are. They see you as basically bliss. And furthermore, Buddha transcends time. Is 3 times aware, they call a Buddha. So they see your past and future. Remember, Buddha, don't ever tell me there's no former and future life for Buddha. Buddha, poor guy, before attaining nirvana, he had to remember infinite previous lives of his own. And infinite previous deaths of his own, that means, and deaths and transitions to birth. He was like that. They didn't just make that up for fun. He really did that. Then he saw everybody else's many infinite previous lives. And by the way, if you come to be aware of your own infinite previous lives and everybody else's previous lives, you realize that everybody else is your beloved, your lover, your mother, and also everybody else is your ex. And so you don't want to go through that again. And so you naturally are tied by compassion with them all. You realize you've always been entangled with them all forever. So he had those 2 realizations in any version of Buddha story, and then freedom from contamination. He experienced the bliss of nirvana. So my point is, he sees this is the inconceivability. Norman mentioned the word. The inconceivability of the Buddha state is not a simplistic state. It's a state where Buddha sees everyone as bliss. He also sees each one of our future blisses as Buddhas, but he does not ignore that each of us feels miserable and feels sort of unsatisfied, and we need something more, and we don't have enough. And in that Mahasatipatthana Sutta, when he's discussing the 4th noble truth, he talks about, and in relation to the 3rd noble truth, and he says, where is this Nibbana that we're talking about? Where is it? He asked that question rhetorically as he's leading the monks into meditating on it. And then I jumped up in some wonderful retreat place in Sri Lanka with a eureka shout of joy. He says, it's in all the pleasurable and agreeable sensations. And then he lists all the same sensations, audio, visual, every single kind of sensation that you can possibly have, mental, that any being has who has 5, 6 senses, like humans. That's where they are. And he had just said that's what suffering is. And what was the difference between the 2 lists? The first list of the truth of suffering was accompanied by craving. So in other words, one wasn't really into the pleasure or the agreeable sensation. One was craving more. And therefore it became the suffering of change. In the one where it's Nibbana is there in your own visual thing, in your own audio thing, in your own smells and everything, was when you're just letting the bliss happen and you're not craving more of it. So you're sort of, in the words of the famous Saint Ramdas, you're being here now with it and you're not wanting more. So even non-dualism, in other words, is taught in a hint in Theravada, where they insist that, Nibbana is like an extinction. It's like you leave the world. But that's negated, of course, by Nagarjuna and by Buddha himself in the Mahayana Sutras. And it's negated by saying that any place you would go to, you'd be extinct, any kind of nirvikalpa samadhi, any type of state of being completely isolated from interrelationship, is only a formless realm state. He taught 4 of them to those monks and mendicants. Infinite space, infinite consciousness, absolute nothingness, at least an experience of seeming absolute nothingness. Newsflash, there is no such thing as nothing, but you can have an experience that seems like it. And then beyond consciousness and unconsciousness, those are states where you have no body, and therefore you can't be bumped into and can't be hurt, and you can't hurt anyone else. And you might think that would fit your definition of what the absolute is in the sense of non-related, but he clearly taught they are simply relational states, even though they seem as if they are non-relational and therefore have a kind of relief about them, but they are not permanent states. They are not Nibbana. The only way Nibbana could be is to be uncreated. The only way it can be uncreated and yet enjoyed by us is that it's always been here. Therefore, when we realize Nibbana, we're simply realizing the way we actually are. And that's the way the Buddha actually sees us. And that's why he doesn't abandon us as his bodhisattva vow to become a Buddha. And pari Nibbana, pari doesn't mean final. Pari means total. So Buddha is being in Nibbana as us with his Dharmakaya, in fact. So, and Shakyamuni Buddha is still here, by the way. He's still here with us now. Vimalakirti mentions it totally. The Buddhas don't leave. They're not like the Lone Ranger. They don't, who is that masked man? He left his body and to teach us that we're going to leave our body. No, yes, teaching some people that. But other people, he's becoming present everywhere. He already was. He's just showing it, you know. If you become a Buddha, it's really weird. Do you realize that? Because why you think when you become people want to become Buddha unless they're Zen students and they think that the wanting is depriving them of the state. But otherwise they want to be Buddha, and which is sensible on a relative level. And they think that being Buddha is going to make you feel very triumphant. But that's why, because it's like, wow, the ultimate, peak experience. But actually, it's not a peak experience in one way. In one way it is, but in one way it isn't, because Dharmakaya means infinite, unlimited, and it is also present everywhere. So that means you think you're everybody. How would you like that? If I'm trying to give a talk to you all, and I suddenly thought I was all of you, I would be gagging. What would there be to say? You know? And that means, and then I would have to, in order to be able to do it, I have to do it in two ways. I have to see you all as complete creatures of bliss. Just, every little hair follicle of yours is just a radiance of bliss. At the same time, I could not ignore that you might be feeling uncomfortable. You might have some sickness. You might be in pain. You might have a headache. You might be worrying about your hairdo. I'd be involved in both sides completely. Luckily, the bliss is more powerful because it's more real. And Buddha is a realist. He's the ultimate realist. In fact, when I'm, as an academic teacher, I'm often pressed to give as a slogan, or what is Buddhism? Come on, tell us in one sentence. What's Buddhism? What's Buddhism? And I have a three-word phrase. Finally, after many years, Buddhism is realism, period. Do you like that? Oh, no, how can that be? Realistic means it's all miserable. No, that's the surface reality. The deeper reality is it's all bliss. And this then leads me to my announcement of the day. I know I don't have much time, although we started late, so I have more than 40. I have 40 minutes. I was talking with Ramdas again, actually, last May. And I came up with what I decided from the Lotus Sutra. That's why I have the Lotus Sutra loaded here, just in case. The 4 nobler truths. Okay? Buddha taught 4 noble truths, yes. But he also taught 4 nobler truths. But you didn't hear about those. Did you? Are you worried? The noble truths are suffering, cause, freedom from suffering, and path, right? We know that. And actually, when Shariputra complains in the Vimalakirti Sutra to the goddess of wisdom, that, what do you mean, What about the 4 noble truths, he says. And she says, the 4 noble truths? She says, those are taught for the excessively proud. Really? She doesn't say that. And the reality of it is, reality is bliss. The cause of bliss is love and the interconnectedness of all things. You don't need freedom from bliss. It's eternal and permanent. It's the Buddha state. It's the Sambhoga Kaya. The word Sambhoga in Sanskrit means sam means total, complete. Bhoga means enjoyment. So Sambhoga means total enjoyment. And in the Kama Sutra literature, horror of horrors, Sambhoga means orgasm. Muted laughter. Scary word. Wilhelm Reich got arrested for that word. So, but the point is that's what Buddhahood is that kind of a blissful state, because the reality is made of this bliss. And why is this infinite bliss energy there? Because all energy is energy, because it's all giving itself away. It's completely there for everyone. And clear light of bliss is the third noble truth, nobler truth, what's called clear light of bliss. And what that is like all reality as a kind of field of infinite energy. Now think about it for a minute, what infinite energy means. Infinite energy means it doesn't do anything because everything is done already. So it's already perfect. So it doesn't need to do a thing. But any being who needs anything, who's made of that infinite energy, if they know how, can draw infinitely from it. So really, this is Buddhist. Even you could even say this is more heresies today. You could say that's Buddhist theism. If you don't insist on some tribal figure with a beard and a male, or even a female, or even a trans god, if you don't insist on some anthropomorphic form, then if God is an infinite field of blissful energy, that is Buddha's discovery. That is why Buddha is happy. That's the reason. And then we come back to the issue of compassion, and we come the issue of, your empathy even, feeling the feelings of others. So the Dharmakaya is the ultimate empath, and the Nirmanakaya is the result. Nirmanakaya, the three bodies of Buddha, it's taught in Mahayana. The Nirmanakaya means a body of emanation, but it's infinite emanations. And why? Because when you are someone who has this inconceivable double awareness, where you see everything as an ocean of bliss, and with all the beings in it, and you see them all there in every detail of them, but it's all made of bliss, then you completely can't ignore their suffering, those who are not aware of that themselves. And you realize that they are having that suffering because they don't know what they really are, which is part of the ocean of bliss. Even they're all of it, actually. An inconceivable. Each individual is yet all of it, because that's how a Buddha feels. And so then, although that feeling of their suffering, that empathy for their suffering, is not as strong as the complete blissful oneness with them all, it is strong enough to pull that Buddha's presence to pieces. And therefore they say, Gangla, what is it? Gangdul Gangla Detamba, that's right. Whatever comes, whomever, that you manifest to them, if you follow me. So the Bodhisattva as a vow says, when I'm a Buddha, I want to be medicine for every headache. I want to be a land for people who don't have one. I want to be a planet for those who don't have a planet. I want to be a slave for those who need a slave. I want to be a master for those who need a master. I want to be a wife for those who need a wife. I want to be a husband for those who need a husband, etc., etc. Anything that any being needs, I will be that, says a Bodhisattva. And the Buddha's Nirmanakaya is fulfilling that. And Buddha is able to do that because of this infinite bliss energy that a Buddha being is completely in contact with, in fact. Okay? So that means poor Shakyamuni Buddha thinks he's all of us. Right here in LA, in the Writers Guild Theater. He thinks he's all of us. And he also thinks he's us whenever our future comes that we feel completely free of suffering and completely blissful. And we realize, and that when you do that, it isn't that you're going to go buy some bliss. You're going to take some drug and get some bliss. You're going to have a relationship that's going to give you bliss. You're going to own some stuff that's going to give you bliss. It's because that's what your actual nature is. Your Buddha nature is Buddha's presence in you as a Dharmakaya. It's Buddha's presence as infinite bliss in you. So you don't discover some alien thing, you discover your actual nature. And actually, I would go so far as to say, for example, Buddhist medicine became really popular in India. I think it was very much at the root. It was connected with Ayurveda. Ayurveda means, Ayu is one of the 8 branches of Buddhist medicine. It's the long life branch, because the Brahmins who were promoting that after Buddhism, they were into their long life. But the Buddhist medicine had pediatrics, gynecology, surgery, all kind of other extra things just of helping people have a decent regular life as well as long life. And the Buddhist mendicants were excellent, purveyors of that. And they didn't care about caste and things and who was pure and impure and gender. And so they were able to be doctors for everyone. And that's why some of the first Buddhist temples in Tibet, Mongolia, Japan, China, Korea are medicine Buddha temples. Yakushi, in Japan. Yaoshifo in China. and Yakuza, I think, in Korea. So the medicine is really key to Dharma teaching for regular people. Okay? So this is the show. Oh, Four Nobler Truths. Yeah, right. So now to bring it back a little bit to earth, this means dealing with death in a different way, dealing with suffering in a different way. When you say compassion and you say empathy, and empathy even has a little danger because an ordinary person might be too drained out into other suffering and then lose themselves in it. But I want to ask you, when you are suffering, do you really want someone with you who is like enjoying or experiencing your suffering as much as you? Do you actually want that? You know, you're in agony and I really feel your agony. And they're like that. Do you really want that? Is that going to help you, do you think? A surgeon who is going to do heart surgery because you just had a heart attack, should he be feeling the pain in your heart when he or she is about to hack your chest bone in half? Or should he be feeling cool, maybe listening to rock and roll or something? Which would you prefer? I think you would prefer one. We all know that we do things better and more effectively when we're cheery. There's even a commercial that teaches it. Do you know that one? Do you remember the Zoloft commercial? Has anybody seen it? There's that lady in the kitchen, and everything's going wrong. The dog is like making a mess. The little baby has thrown his porridge on the floor. The father's cranking, "Where's my coffee?" And he's reading his paper, and the plastic waffles that you just put in from General Mills are smoking in the weird rotating, vibrating oven in her Ronald Reagan kitchen. She's there, and then you look out the window of the suburban kitchen. There's yellow flowers out there, and they come off the stems, and they form the syllables Zola. And then you get the idea from that quick image that they delivered brilliantly that she took one. And then suddenly, bam, here's your coffee. Shut up, mister. Get your paper. Here, dog, out the door. Kid, eat your porridge. And I'm cool because she doesn't feel freaked out. So we all know, that shows that everybody knows that when you're happy, you're effective. And even with a person who's suffering, you're effective. So the source of compassion is, what compassion means is wishing for others to be free of suffering. It goes right along with love, which is wishing, in Buddhist definition, which is wishing others to have happiness. How can you wish them to be happy if you don't know what it is? Yourself. Where's the energy that you have to deal with their deep suffering unless you have some inner force in yourself? And what is the inner force in ourselves if not bliss? In your own daily health, what is it? Why do people get cancer when their mate dies or something, or when some terrible thing happens and they get all stressed out or they lose their billions of dollars? Why? Because they get depressed and they miss the bliss of just being there, of just one cell connecting to another, one macrophage running around and eating some alien weird thing. And the macrophages get depressed. And then they don't go bother to eat the bad cell. Then the cells all grow. So bliss is what you are. And it is your health, actually, and your creativity, and your ability to be compassionate. That's what it is. And, it feels like you feel guilt-stricken to think that you should be happy while others are suffering. But you won't help them unless you're happy while you're doing it. Then you will burn out. That's the burnout danger, where you miss your own bliss. And that's what Buddha taught us, actually. And Buddhists should therefore be blissful if you want to understand Buddhism. Okay? Do you promise me you're going to be blissful? Seriously. One time I wrote a book about the Dalai Lama. I don't remember what I did. I wrote a book about him some time back. It is 136, but I didn't really start till 110. And I was challenged by the editor, a nice Australian lady editor of Simon & Schuster, at the end of the book, because of the Tibet situation being so dire, with the Chinese locking it down again, yet again, and like they're locking the poor Muslims down in Uiguria, but they've been doing that for 10 years lately in Tibet, again at a new level of intensity, but it's just not so known as the one in Uyghur, the Muslim camps, And they cleverly had all those Tibetan monasteries they rebuilt for tourists. They originally destroyed in the 60s and 70s, then they rebuilt for tourists. They let the Tibetans rebuild for tourism. Now they're using them as camps, actually. They have been since 2008. And so she said, you have to write some sort of something hopeful in the end. 10 points of hope. Do something like that, she said. So then I wrote 10 points of hope. And then the last point of hope that I got to was, how can we help Tibet? How can we help all the beings who are suffering? We have to be happy to do it. We're obviously not doing it by being guilty. We're not doing it. We're not guilty because we're not guilty enough. Because we have the absolute demonic bad culture of materialism. And we have it, and it isn't, you may be spiritual. Maybe you think you were Cleopatra in a previous life. Or Caesar, But actually you went to classes and schools and science classes where seeming authoritative people informed you for sure the mind is an epiphenomenon of the brain. And those frogs, they don't feel it when you chop off their legs or you do whatever you do in your biology class because they're animals and they don't have minds. And actually oh, great, thank you. Oh, Lisa, you're so kind. 10 minutes. Thank you. And, you learned all that. And so we don't, my guru once, when I was meditating at 3 a.m, he came in because he used to try to prevent me from meditating all the time. It's one of his things, believe it or not. And because I was good at it, and then I would sort of escape into some quietistic state, and he would try to block that because you can become addicted to that. And and I was annoyed at the time. And this one time, it was very vivid. I remember particularly, he says, "What are you doing?" He turns on the light. I had a nice candle. I was in front of the Buddha. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm a Buddhist monk. I'm meditating." He says, "Well, why are you meditating?" He says, "Well, what do you mean? I want to attain enlightenment." Well, of course I'm meditating. I'm a Buddhist monk. He says, "Oh, don't bother," he said. "You can't attain enlightenment. You're an American." I said, "What do you mean?" And I sort of knew what he meant a little bit. So I said, "No, I believe in former and future life. I've been in Tibet. I know. No. I'm really a Tibetan at heart." Something like that. He says, No. He says, "You're so American." He says, "In order to attain enlightenment, what attains enlightenment is your mind. And you Americans are taught that you don't have one," he said. And then I was like, "No way. And I've been studying this, and I know about continuity, and I know this and that." But he's right. Our culture teaches us that mind is not over matter. When we hear about Uri Geller bending a spoon, when we go to the Matrix, we think, "Oh, that's cute and that's nice," but that couldn't have happened for sure. That's our underlying, we think that's realistic, actually. Whereas if we really knew the power of the mind, we would actually be open to such things, even though we might not be able to do them yet, but we would be open to that. And we would realize mind is actually more powerful. It isn't that mind is all there is. That's not quite the highest form in Buddhist metaphysics, Buddhist science. There's one possible mentalistic reductionism is one thing. Materialistic reduction is another thing. Those are all such theories are relativities. They're not absolute in Buddhist science, which is truly non-dogmatic. But the mind is more powerful of the two. The super subtle energy of mind is the one that connects to the infinite energy of the clear light of the void, clear light of emptiness, what's called the clear light of emptiness. That infinite quiescent energy that is nevertheless, although quiescent, it's an infinite well of plenitude. We can draw on to manifest whatever is needed to help whomever, if we knew how, which a Buddha does, Okay, so therefore death, if we know that death, really know, I was so pleased, I saw a brief YouTube, His Holiness was sitting in an airport in Poland with a bunch of little kids and so forth, and they were talking about something in rebirth or whatever to him, and he was saying, "Oh, don't worry." He says, "Dying is no problem. It's just like you went out and bought a new jacket, a new suit of clothes, a new dress." He was saying so sweetly to these little kids. And they go, "Oh, really? Oh, that's nice." He was saying, "It's okay. It's just like you got a new shirt, you get a new body." He didn't say, I often say it's the cheapest method of rejuvenation. You don't have to go to Switzerland and eat some weird chemical or something that they manufactured. Just die and be reborn, find a nice womb of a nice lady who lives in a nice neighborhood with only a semi-traumatizing husband. Okay? That's the thing to do. And then you can be young and whatever, and then of course you'll be semi-traumatized, but never mind. You're human, you can manage. So anyway, what did I, oh yeah. So the last thing, I know, we're getting down there. So the last thing in the 10 points of hope was, and this is my charge to you, I was going to read you from Lotus Sutra, but of course there's no time. But Lotus Sutra, the Buddha teaches first, before he teaches, everything is bliss. It's all my body. It's all lasts forever. It's uncreated. It's always been this way. And there's a way of still, without leaving town, you can be in bliss for the benefit of all the beings who are all your lovers and your mothers. And that's all totally possible, and you can do it, and you will do it. And Norman Fisher have said you have to do it to be a bodhisattva, all of you. And to be a bodhisattva doesn't mean you have some high attainment. It just means you make a vow that in all my future lives, you open up to the fact that you are not going to be nothing when you die. One of my other slogans, just nobody gets out of here a dead. You're stuck here forever, and that's the problem. That's not an excuse. That's not an easy thing, because you don't want to be stuck in a bad way. If you've been harming people all your life, you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to attract to yourself a lot of difficulties. But if you're loving and open, you'll have nothing but better time. You'll love everyone, they'll love you, it'll be better and better, so you don't fear it. So death is just quantum leap, one way or another. Bardo, my friend Dr. Nita is here, we're going to be talking tomorrow. I actually don't know what we're going to be talking about, but he's very good at talking about bardos, he's a doctor. So anyway, the Buddha teaches that when he teaches that message that everything is great, the four nobler truths, okay? For people who are ready to take on being related to everyone, without ever ceasing and without giving up and without nurturing the false view that they can become nothing. Newsflash to the scientists. Nobody has discovered nothing. Therefore, it's not an empirical discovery. It's not experimental. It's blind faith that you can be nothing. The good thing is nothing. So you can't be nothing. No one's ever going to be nothing. No one ever has been and never will be. You'll either be a vast, infinite ocean of bliss like a Buddha, or you'll keep struggling along like me, becoming old and living and dying endlessly, one or the other, But even though that, you can't escape from bliss, because they're all around us, infinite. It passes infinite. They're infinite beings already Buddhas. They're everywhere. They're crawling all over it, every atom and molecule. Your DNA is not full. I read something from the sand people, my dear friends up there, about how one DNA molecule has as many particles in it as the stars in a galaxy. But each particle is a Buddha world. There's like micro Buddhas everywhere. Male ones, female ones, trans ones, inanimate ones. That's the vision of it. Silence. It's right here. So anyway, the last thing is, so he sits next to a dead Buddha. When he teaches that, a dead Buddha comes up who has a vow that in the future, whenever Buddha gives the nobler truths that are in the Lotus Sutra, for people who are able to do that, the dead Buddha wants to be there in a giant tower. And then it's the Buddhist return of the mummy. It is. And the Buddha even says, "You want to see the dead Buddha?" And they say, "Yes." And he goes, pulls a bolt across, just like opening the vault for the mummy. And he opens the harmika of the giant tower. And there's the mummy perfectly preserved. And he says, "Well done, Buddha. You're going to teach Lotus Sutra, I can tell. So I'm back." And then here, and he moves over in the center of the place there, and he says, "Sit down here." So you have one live Buddha and one dead Buddha right there. And the live Buddha teaches the Lotus Sutra, which is the four nobler truths, which is that everything is fine. It's fine, it's all right. And okay, so that's it. I know you don't really believe it, but the charge to you is, it is our duty, and it's especially if we connect to Buddha, we don't even have to be Buddhists. It is our duty to be so happy personally, choose to be happy ourselves, satisfied, therefore, with our degree of happiness, that even if they kill us, we will die happy. How do you like that? Okay?